Hello there and welcome back to the channel. This is Nerd.World Films, and in today's episode I am still in a very messy room because work and life exist. Anyway, this is a continuation of my Star Trek Nerd Talk series, clearly a very popular series that I'm going to continue even if it kills me. And this one is on Star Trek Insurrection, the second of the Next Generation era movies, and arguably the weakest. It starred Patrick Stewart, was directed by Jonathon Frakes, and was generally all round sort of middling kind of reviews and reception. But it did have F. Murray Abraham as the leader of the Sonar, and, you know, that is always a win. With all that said, let's get started on this discussion. So, to be clear, this is take number 2 because my computer crashed after I filmed this video and others last night, wasting a lot of time. On the other hand, with this one it might actually be a good thing because I did ramble a little bit and this segment went on for like 15 minutes, so I'll condense it down this time and not babble so much. The plot of Star Trek Insurrection basically starts out, we're aboard the Enterprise E, and the Enterprise is inducting a new race into the Federation, a very young species who've only had warp capability for about 6 years. The Federation is obviously hoping to drain some resources during the middle of the Dominion War to prop up this species after making them a target for the Jem'Hadar, a species that probably don't even have any deep space capable starships. Having warp capability doesn't mean that you have ships. Big ships, fast ships, long range ships. Most likely this race probably haven't broken the warp 2 barrier. They probably only got warp 1 capability. Anyway, Worf's aboard the ship for some reason, and we never find out why. We then go to the planet of the Baku. We find that Data's gone a little nuts and is exposing the Federation's cloaking observation program. Notable that the Federation is quite happy to use cloaking technology for scientific observation purposes, but not for so much in the nefarious. Oh wait, no, yes, they do in this film. The Holo Ship. We'll learn about that in a little bit. Now, we also see that the Federation is allied with the Sonar, and the Sonar are a hostile species known for producing Ketracel White, the narcotic that the Jem'Hadar have been addicted to by the Dominion. Now, this is a strange choice by the Federation. They're desperate for allies during the war, but the Sonar are also not that powerful, so they're an odd choice for an ally. But the Enterprise, when it comes to aid Data, when it finds out he's gone a little nuts, they are ordered to leave the Briar Patch by Admiral Doherty, and there's another interesting individual, yet another example of an evil Starfleet admiral, but also I always questioned, why did he not have his own ship there? Why was he aboard one of the Sonar vessels in the first place? I know Starfleet was trying to keep all this kind of quiet, probably even Section 31 weren't involved, because I imagine if they were, at some point they would have thought to gather some intelligence on the Sonar and at least do a bioscan on one of them. I mean, they were collecting biological and technological data on the Baku. No one thought to do the same on the Sonar while they were there with their allies? No, they didn't. And they would have realised with one bioscan, just one, that the Sonar and the Baku were the same race. It would have been a really easy thing to figure out, and God knows why they didn't. Anyway, after apparently the Federation stops being curious about the Sonar, all this happens. The Enterprise is ordered to leave, but Picard starts a romantic relationship as a B-story with one of the locals, who look surprisingly human for yet another alien race, and do that weird, stupid, I can slow down time just because I'm old thing, which I have to attribute as possibly some kind of side effect for living in the Briar Patch, because it makes no sense that you would evolve that ability or learn to manipulate time just because you're a bit old. Hell, Guinan should have practically been a Q then. Anyway, Picard threatens to expose what is happening when they learn that the Baku are actually a technologically sophisticated people who even tried to repair Data's positronic matrix but simply lack the tools or possibly the know-how to properly do it. It was obvious that they didn't need to stay. Picard, continuing to grow suspicious, tried to report them to the Federation for what was happening, relocating them, discovering the holoship, all that sort of naughtiness. Doherty, not wanting to have his plans exposed and slowly spiraling into more evil and corrupt, apparently, orders, or at least allows, the sonar to pursue the Enterprise. Now, the Enterprise was more than a match for a sonar battleship on an average day. And the sonar knew that the Federation, particularly Starfleet, was a lot more powerful than them, so that's why they weren't really stepping out of line. But this is another question as to why Starfleet didn't have a ship standing by, either near to or in the Briar Patch with the sonar, just in case, just get a Galaxy-class starship just to sit at the edge of the Briar Patch or come into it. I know that it required some engine modifications and stuff, but it's not exactly difficult to do for Starfleet, considering its vast resources. So there's many plot holes in this and questions as to the decisions that Starfleet was making. In my opinion, Doherty was simply an idiot. Anyway, eventually, the sonar inevitably and predictably turn on Starfleet. Adarawafu decides to kill Admiral Doherty and take what they need. Now, the reason that Starfleet allied with the sonar in the first place is they needed every resource they could during the Dominion War. This is what was established at the beginning of the movie, and they learned that in the Briar Patch there's phenomenal medical applications to some of the radiation, so the latent radiation in the background of the nebula, regenerative abilities, longevity, all kinds of things. But the concentrations are very low, scattered across the nebula. After all, nebulas are big, light years across, and the scatterings of particles within a nebula are very wide. Nebulas are not as dense as you would think, so actually Starfleet to collect those kinds of materials in a nebula would have took a long time. But the planet had sort of accumulated them over time in its atmosphere, and there was a huge dense concentration, hence why the Baku was so youthful and long-lived. The problem was the Federation lacked the technology to collect these particles safely from the planetary atmosphere, and because of the war, they were in a bit of a hurry. They didn't have time to build one themselves. But the sonar, who'd been preparing for this little action for a few years, again, something Starfleet should have questioned as to why they happened to have this highly specialized vessel to do this already. Again, whatever. They already have the technology to collect the particles, so Starfleet forges an alliance. They'll share it, the sonar will collect it, but because the Briar Patch resides within Federation space, the sonar have to behave themselves. They can't forcibly relocate the Baku because they think they're a pre-warp civilization, not a colony of some other society. But now they think Prime Directive doesn't apply, yada yada yada, but it does. Picard argues this. The battleships end up in a big fight with the Enterprise. Boom boom, Riker maneuver, shove some gas down their throats. Although Riker, legend of a first officer. Anyway, you then have this little escape across ground, which is actually really, really good. One of the better parts of the movie, where the sonar are trying to catch them, but they've got transport inhibitors in place, so they can't just beam them up, so they have to physically go down and get them. But Worf and Picard and the others are fighting them off, and it's where you get that awesome scene of Worf smacking a drone out of the air with his phaser rifle and bazookaing a fighter clean out of the air. It's awesome to learn that Starfleet even have those sort of plasma bazooka things, or whatever it was, or ion cannon, or whatever type of energy bazooka it was. Surface to air anti-aircraft weapon of some kind anyway. Awesome. Eventually, of course, they do beam all the sonar aboard the holoship, make use of it to trick them into thinking they're actually winning when they're not. But they eventually, Ruafu gets aboard the ship, and after a bit of a boss fight with Picard, ends up falling to his death. Picard's beamed off the ship as it blows to hell, and the Baku are saved, and Starfleet goes on its merry way. As I said, this film has a lot of plot holes and a lot of detractors. It is one of the odd-numbered Star Trek movies after all. There are a lot of issues for me, mostly around Starfleet's decision-making, where the sonar are concerned, as well as other things. But overall, I find it to be quite an enjoyable movie. I actually really like the little sing-along bit at the beginning where Picard, Worf and Data are singing a jaunty tune. That's rather nice. That said, Patrick Stewart does have a lovely singing voice. Michael Dorn not so much, but apparently Brent Spiner can carry a tune. Anyway, Worf can do Klingon opera. He can stick to his opera. But there we have the basic plot of the movie. So let's move on to the cast and director of Star Trek Insurrection. So here we go. Star Trek Insurrection. Can't let that trailer play too long in the background. virtually every video on this channel is demonetized. This movie obviously stars a lot of the original cast from the Next Generation era. Everyone from, of course, Patrick Stewart, Jonathon Frakes, who of course directed this movie, as well as I said, they bring back Worf, and it's often a thing that they were shoehorning Worf in rather awkwardly into these films, and it became increasingly ludicrous. I mean, First Contact kind of made sense. The Borg are attacking Earth, you send the Defiant to help defend it. It's a powerful warship with a battle-experienced crew and commander, although why Sisko didn't command it and Worf did is a little... Again, it's kind of twitchy. The out-of-universe answer is they couldn't bring Avery Brooks into the First Contact movie, but they could bring Worf. It would have undermined Patrick Stewart's character Picard to have brought Sisko in, or at least perceptively it could have done. But realistically, it would have done nothing. It would have been great. But in-universe, it makes a little less sense. You can imagine Sisko was caught up with other things like wartime planning, but the Borg attacking Earth, you think, would take a little bit more precedent. Now, of course, the Defiant is only one ship, and Earth is a long way from Bajor, so it was a long way to send one ship. But we can imagine that probably several other vessels, as part of the task forces fighting against the Dominion and the Cardassians, were probably sent. Probably many of those ships that were at Wolf 359, the Battle of Sector 001, were likely ships from the front lines. They won't have just been part of the task force defending Earth in general, so getting off topic. But as I said, it does seem increasingly shoehorned in. Here he's just kind of aboard the Enterprise. But whatever. We obviously have Gates McFadden and F. Murray Abraham, bringing a lot of gravitas to the role of the villain. And that's one of the things I will say for Star Trek villains. They often bring an amazing actor in to play them, if sometimes they're not as well thought out or as deep a character as they could potentially be. And other than that, you had, of course, Donna Murphy as the love interest for Picard, although I really missed Vash. Anyway, with the other sort of side filler cast, other than F. Murray Abraham, you had Anthony Zerbe as Doherty, and as much as his character was a bit of a douche, I think the guy really sold that character to you. You saw the flaws of the man. He wasn't actually a bad guy. He was a guy who had, with all the best intentions, headed down a pathway that took him to a bad place that he was no longer able to get out of, and by the time he realized where it ended up, it was too late, and he got his face stretched to death. Not a way to go, really. You'd want to go that way, would you? But yeah, Next Generation cast and crew for the most part. Sometimes that might make a film a little inaccessible, I think, and I think by this point the Star Trek movies were in the early phases of that problem, of being a little more niche than what they probably should have been. For better or worse, the 2009 film dragged Star Trek out of that little niche corner it was sitting in and made a little bit more mass appeal. So, love them or hate them, at least they got people watching Star Trek again. Alright, so the final part of this video, my scoring of it. Now, I am a massive Star Trek fan, and as I said, I can watch this film, as I'm sure every Star Trek fan can, more or less, and kind of enjoy it, but it does have quite a few glaring storyline elements that are problematic. Most of them revolving around the Federation's confusing decision to ally with a race like the Sona. They've enslaved two other civilizations, they're producers of narcotics, they're incredibly hostile, they use banned weapons, clearly they don't subscribe to any treaties, and they know practically nothing about them. For example, these seemingly must be a nomadic people, unless they had gone back to their original homeworld where the Baku originated from and conquered that first. That seems unlikely, so Starfleet doesn't even know where these people's homeworld are. It's like the Cabal all over again. It's just like these nomadic killers just wandering about doing whatever the hell they please. So there's that, and a lot of other decisions that are fairly twitchy. For example, the simple idea that they're just going to abandon the Prime Directive and forcibly relocate these people, and as Picard puts it, I mean, it is a heavy-handed kind of thing to throw in there, but he does make a valid point. Admiral Doherty says native population 600 people. It's like, when does it constitute a civilization? Where does the line get drawn? We can relocate 600, fine. Can we relocate 1,000? Can we relocate 10,000? And he sort of escalates it. It's like, is it 1,000,000? Is it 1,000,000,000? Where's the line drawn? We don't own this planet. It resides within our territory, yes, but there's people on it, and under our laws, we're supposed to leave those people alone. Even if they become a spacefaring race, we still have to work with them, and it's technically their space. It'll be their world. So there's a lot of confusing decisions. Now, I often see in Star Trek that the Prime Directive is sometimes treated as more of a guide, and actually, if you really think about it, it's never been laid out on screen or in any official canon exactly what the wording of the Prime Directive is. You're just not supposed to interfere or share technology, things of that nature, but it's very vague, very broad, and the exact letter of the law of how the Prime Directive works seems to be, to some degree, open to interpretation. There isn't always consequences for breaking it. There's sometimes an investigation, a court-martial, whatever, but usually they kind of just get a slap on the wrist and go, don't do that again. In Into Darkness, we see Kirk gets demoted for it. But that's an extreme example. But that means that this Prime Directive, that's supposed to be the most important principle in the Federation, isn't so enforced that someone violating it so blatantly is arrested, tried, and sent to prison for breaking it. So it's not like a major crime still. So it might not be so much a law within the Federation, more of a Starfleet regulation. Because of course, how are they supposed to enforce it with freighter crews? What about Captain Yates aboard the Zosa? I mean, technically she was contracted with the Bajorans, but she was still human. Her crew were Federation citizens, not all human, but definitely all Federation citizens. Also, does the Prime Directive, I'm assuming it applies to every member state of the Federation, they've all got to agree to it as becoming part of the Federation. But again, that's never been explicitly stated. So do Andorians have to stick to it? Bolians? So in Captain Yates' case, she has Bolians on her crew. Do they have to adhere to it? Also, civilians, how do they make civilians agree to it? Civilian ships existed in the Federation. They probably vastly outnumber those of Starfleet, so how do they regulate it? How do you control what they do and don't do? You probably can't, so that's why in my head it's probably more of a guide. So but anyway, it brings us round to, there are lots of stumbling issues which this film brings up when you start to overthink it, which as Star Trek fans, that's what we do. It's half the fun of the enjoyment of the franchise. Now, of course, some of these things are ignored by writers for story convenience and whatever, but to a degree, if they were to anchor the Prime Directive on screen and say this is exactly what it is, it would probably limit storyline telling. So it's probably, we can assume, a 5,000 page document that's only someone like Data or Spock is going to read it and actually fully comprehend, understand and memorize. Whereas someone like Kirk or even Picard, who himself is a scholarly thinking man's captain, probably isn't going to have the whole thing committed to bloody memory. He's going to have a bullet point version and go, these are the important bits to remember, everything else I'll look up if I need to. So it brings up a lot of issues. So those issues sometimes detract from me from the movie. Starfleet's use of cloak technology, their willingness to remove the Baku. Now this is meant to show how desperate the Federation is becoming. I understand that during war, principles are sometimes thrown out the window, and that's an easy thing to explain away, and it's understandable. It doesn't matter whether these so-called evolved humans of the 24th century are truly evolved, or if they are still just human. What does evolved mean anyway? In 300 years, the human race is not going to have anatomically changed in any significant way, even with interbreeding with other species. So, that doesn't mean evolved in the way that evolved normally means. It means socially and culturally evolved, but you can't get past baser human instincts. So during war, humans, as Quark puts it, are going to be as savage and brutal as any Klingon. So, getting to my score. Where do I rank this film amongst the Star Trek? I think it's somewhere in the middle. So for me, it's only getting, I think it's better than some of them, so it's going to get a 4 out of 6. So it's not the best, it's not the worst, it's a little better than some of the other sort of failed attempts at Star Trek 5, but it's not the best of the Next Generation era movies, but it certainly isn't Actually, no, it may genuinely be the worst of the Next Generation films, but it's still an enjoyable film. I don't dislike, to be honest, even Star Trek V, I don't dislike any of the Star Trek movies, because I like Star Trek, again, very broadly. But this film does have a lot of holes that are glaringly obvious when you start to think about it. So 4 out of 6 is what it's getting. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this movie and whether you enjoyed it. Do you rank it higher than I do? Do you rank it lower? What do you think of the Sonar as antagonists? Was Doherty right? Did he do nothing wrong? Explain why Worf was actually there to me. Anyway, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you for watching. You know, it's quite of a long one. I often ramble in these. But thank you for watching, and bye-bye.